All right, we are on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. DevOps right now, cutting through complexity in uncertain times. So before we begin, we're just going to kind of meet the speakers. We'll toggle off the slides and you can see our lovely faces. Here we are. Hello.
Hi.
So we'll be doing some more personal introductions as the webinar continues, and we'll be kind of just giving you the rundown. And so we'll start with just the agenda for today. My name is Lance. I'm from the mission team, so I'm a senior solutions architect over here. So part of my role is to meet with customers, understand their use cases and technology, and help them kind of architect, migrate, and run workloads on AWS.
Hi, folks. My name is Kelly Looney. I am a consulting partner practice lead for the DevOps segment in the partner organization at AWS. So I work with our DevOps partners with AWS, both technology partners and consulting partners, and help them kind of solve problems for customers. And I'll talk a little bit today about a little bit about how we do that.
Hi, I'm Tori Wielt. I'm a senior solution manager at New Relic, and I focus on DevOps, and I go out and meet with a lot of customers and talk to them about DevOps and how they can mature their systems and processes so they can give great customer experiences.
Today for the webinar, the agenda is basically talking a little bit about AWS's history and just kind of the formation of Amazon Web Services as a whole, and kind of the whole evolution that was undergone, just starting from a monolithic environment and then breaking out into microservices before it was really called that. We're going to talk a little bit about the New Relic platform and how you're able to leverage it to really get great operational insights into applications and infrastructure that's running on AWS, and some of the pain points and challenges that the product helps alleviate. As time goes on and applications and infrastructure grows, things tend to become more complex, and you inevitably find yourself swimming in a sea of unknown unknowns, and hundreds, if not thousands, of data points and metrics that really come into play, and so it's difficult to wade through. So the New Relic product as a whole can really help cut through that complexity, as the webinar is titled. And then we're going to kind of re-intro the mission as a consulting company and talk about our services and how we are here to support efforts to migrate and architect and run workloads on AWS, and how we utilize the New Relic product and platform with our consulting services. We will do a Q&A. Bring up any kind of questions that you have throughout the course of the webinar. We can answer them as they come in. And from there, we'll talk about some next steps in terms of consulting opportunities or ways that all of our teams can help. So Mission is a next generation managed services provider. We offer a comprehensive suite of services to help companies run workloads on the AWS platform. So we will architect, migrate, manage, and optimize workloads, and really offer hands-on keyboard as well as consultative support. And that's kind of Mission as a whole. And once I get our slides up and running here, we can kind of give you the view of that. Tori, maybe you want to do the intro on your side as well?
Absolutely. So New Relic is a company that started out as a humble Ruby monitoring company, and now we've kind of exploded in growth, and we cover many different languages. We have a platform that will monitor your applications, your infrastructure. If you're on services, definitely AWS Lambda. We can cover it all. And the whole point is to have one screen you can look at, to minimize the complexity, and also to have a single place where people can look and have a shared understanding, which we feel like is a key point to DevOps. It used to be in the old days, there would be one person that could understand the architecture of a system, and that just doesn't happen anymore. The systems are so complex. not one person or no group of people can really understand everything that's going on. So you need tools that can help you with that. And we're proud to help a lot of customers move along their maturity path. I want to be careful with that phrase, but help people move from where they are to giving really good customer experience and being focused on that.
Awesome. So this is Kelly. Let me go ahead and I won't jump into a introduction to AWS. I think that most people on the line know a little bit about AWS. I will start to talk a little bit about our topics here, and I'll launch into our presentation. I think we're just about ready to do with the slides, but I'll go ahead and launch into what we have and put the slides up when they're ready. We're here to talk about kind of the key challenge that I see out there with modern applications. To me, the issue that we see, let's get some of these slides up here for you. The biggest challenge that I'm seeing out there with modern applications is complexity. Over and over again, what we're seeing is the modern applications typically are created from a standpoint of many different small pieces. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of how that came about, and especially how that came about in the history of development, the history of development at Amazon and at AWS. And these small different components called nowadays microservices, they were created because we needed applications that could change and could change rapidly. And that's great. That's what we need, is the ability to be able to change rapidly. But the downside to that is that it creates tremendously complex applications. And so that creates the kind of next challenge, which is how do you deal with these complex types of applications? And that's what we're going to talk about here just a little bit. And this also leads to kind of like, what's the issue related to DevOps? I've been in the DevOps world kind of since DevOps has been around. And one of the things I hear about all the time with DevOps is, DevOps, that's about automation. And I want to show a little bit here. This is a variation on a picture that we talk about a lot, which is was originally kind of a napkin kind of a diagram that was made by Jeff Bezos when he was first getting started with Amazon, and it was sort of it's been termed kind of the flywheel of innovation. He was originally talking about how he wanted to constantly be able to build an organization where he could change, lower prices, keep getting customer feedback, create an organization that could constantly get better and better and better. And if you kind of take that kind of from a standpoint of what you're trying to do with DevOps, it's the same sort of thing. It's constantly experimenting, constantly trying to take ideas and get feedback and get more things done. And that's really the essence of DevOps. I talk to too many organizations, and what they tell me is, DevOps, that's just about automating delivery. And yeah, automation is important, but what you've got to understand is why you're automating. I have talked to organizations that have told me, yeah, I've achieved, I'm fully DevOps. I can push a button and send code to production, and then I ask them, well, how often do you do that? And they're like, once a quarter. Well, that's not the point. The point is you got to do this frequently. It's how often, it's how quickly. The automation is a byproduct of your frequency of delivery, how often you're innovating, how often you're trying things. So that's the real point. And so it's not automation first, it's automation, you have to automate in order to get this quick experimentation that's going on. So it's getting this innovation flywheel in place. That's the real point. So let's look a little bit at kind of what's the history here. When we look at Amazon, this happened almost 20 years ago. We, like so many organizations, started out with a big monolith. We had a giant application, Amazon.com, was giant in its day, back in 2001, had a big relational database, just one database that everybody was sharing and everybody was using. We had several hundred-person development team all working on this thing. It became very cumbersome to make changes. You had to replace the whole thing one at a time. And we did something kind of interesting that I thought was kind of unusual for its time, is we had what I would term a top-down directive to become bottom-up. From the top down, we decided to incorporate something that I would call, that in the time was called service-oriented architecture. Nowadays, we would call this going to a microservices architecture, but in that time frame, people didn't really talk about microservices very much. We essentially decided to start building all of our software in terms of small components. And why were they small? It's because independently of deciding to make everything separate, we decided that we were going to work in small teams. And this is where the kind of what's well known now kind of idea of two pizza teams came about. We adopted this sort of idea that we would work in small teams that were small enough that the whole team could be fed with a couple of pizzas. So this idea of small teams working independently on their own pieces of software, that became kind of the idea within Amazon. So you can think of it as we took a bunch of people working on a big app, and we broke the whole organization into what at the time was 100 different pieces, and what has now become thousands of little companies or little pieces, all working somewhat independently. And what's interesting about that is that is scaled. We're continuing to work that way. We're continuing to grow with these tiny little organizations building their own little pieces of software, each using public interfaces. And the other interesting side of this is that, kind of architecturally, I think that the original organizations, the original apps that we kind of built, the original web apps, were fairly simple. They were like, oh, okay, here's one server, it's talking to a database with a bunch of tables, and there was some processing, and everything was kind of simple, kind of looking at it. But the other side of this is, as things got bigger and bigger, and as we got hundreds and then thousands and then multiples, many thousands and nowadays it's millions of microservices, this is what our system started to look like. And it got to the place where it was more than any one person could comprehend, really. And this is where you got into a place where absolutely, tooling was required. Lots of help was required in order to enable you to be able to take a look at this and understand and kind of grok what was going on. And so that's what became really, really important, to be able to start to understand these applications and understand, be able to kind of deal with what was out there. So you needed this ability to be able to monitor, to be able to understand different parts of this. There wasn't a way to sort of, at a top level, look at the whole thing. You had to have different tools to look at different parts of the application. So what were the changes that were needed for customers to be able to adopt to modern application development? Well, there were architectural patterns that were key. Software delivery had to change, and then there was an operational model. And I want to give you a few kind of recommendations of how the operational model has changed before I turn things over to Lance and Tori to talk about how they can help. And they can help a lot, believe me. From an architectural standpoint, I think this idea of microservices with public APIs are very key. For us, removing dependencies by putting public APIs in place with the idea that any microservice can be replaced completely and a new microservice can be plugged in without breaking everything else around it was very, very key. And then the other thing to look at in this diagram is that breaking persistence such that each microservice could have its own connection to its own persistence, and such that you don't have different microservices all talking to the same database or to the same tables. There, you would have, one of the things that came out of this whole process for us was this sort of this whole thing that we've come around to within Amazon and AWS of purpose-built databases. What we found is that different services needed different kinds of persistence. An in-memory database was the right kind of persistence for one service. For another service, a relational database with strong querying capabilities was just right. For yet another one, an in-memory database was what made sense. And then another one, a NoSQL database, it was a different kind of a database, was what made the most sense. What we found is that different kinds of persistence that fit the service is what really fit. And so different APIs, different kinds of persistence fit for these different architectures that were here. So a lot of different changes came into place kind of in this area. And then another side, kind of on the delivery pipelines, we went to this kind of idea that instead of one big delivery pipeline, many different delivery pipelines happening in parallel. And one thing this chart doesn't really quite show is that these things aren't all happening in sync. They're happening on their own timeframes. These delivery pipelines are each happening kind of as they need to. So all these developers are working on different services and are doing their delivery at, on an as-needed basis. Almost every piece of work is kind of happening on its own time frame, and deliveries are happening all the time. We literally last year did over 100 million delivery, production deliveries. And so you've got to have this ability to deliver to production with it has to be almost frictionless to be able to get things into delivery. So these giant kind of giant testing cycles of doing giant regression tests just aren't feasible anymore. You've got to be able to make changes very, very small. You got to understand what's changed and be able to test for what's changed. And then if you're doing regression tests, you got to uncouple that from delivery, and you got to do regression all the time rather than do regression as some sort of a release gate. And then the final thing that I want to talk about with you all is a little bit of kind of some of the recommendations that I've got for kind of operations and where operations is going. I think operations is really changing out there. We've spent a lot of time thinking in terms of these organizations that kind of run software without really understanding the software that they're running. They spend more time kind of minding hardware than they do dealing with the actual software that they're running. I don't think that's going to be a thing in the future. I think that running software without understanding said software, that's not going to be a thing. I think that infrastructure is going to be invisible. It's going to be outsourced to your cloud vendor and to tools. And I think that your operations group is going to start to understand the software that they're running. They're going to have to. That doesn't mean they're going to be all programmers, but they're going to have tools. They're going to have to understand something about the software that they're running. Monitoring, logging, analysis, and observability tools like New Relic and others, that's going to be where operations lives and works. And I think watching running software and looking for ways to make it better are going to be what your best technical people are going to be doing. I think that architects that are imagining software that doesn't exist, I think that's a tough place to put your best technical people. I'd much rather have them looking at actual software and looking for ways to make it better rather than imagining software that doesn't exist today. I think that SRE activities are going to be operations job one, regardless of whether you actually have SREs. Interestingly enough, we at AWS don't actually typically have the role of SRE. We do the SRE role within our teams. I say we do the role. We don't have the role. We do all the activities. The key here is that instead of being reactive to software failure, we want you to be proactive and making your software better all the time such that you don't have software failure. That's the real key. And so what I want to do now is I want to turn things over to Lance and to Tori, and I want them to talk a little bit more about how they can help with some of these things.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly, for setting us up that way. I think we've had a lot of discussions about this, about the future of operations and what it looks like and what the important things are. And it's a really interesting space. And I just want to share our perspective as a monitoring company, what we see with customers and how you can measure reliability and improve the customer experience, because ultimately that's what it's all about. So I'm going to put this slide up to make our lawyers happy. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the new Relic platform and give you a sense of that, and a little bit about observability, that we hear that term a lot, and I want to share with you our view on it, and then talk about the path it takes to get to maturity, quote unquote, and how you can use New Relic to gain that and get a better experience. And then we'll jump inside the product just for a few minutes, just to give you a sense of how we're dealing with it internally and externally. So we really believe that bringing everything into the one particular tool, our platform, will help you. Doesn't matter if it's logs, it doesn't matter if it's open telemetry, if you're using Prometheus, whatever you're using, bringing it all together so you can aggregate it and work on slicing and dicing the data that you need, because I think that's really important. So observability is a term that's out there a lot now. People are talking about it. From our perspective, we feel like observability is a way that you can look at things, look at the system, and not only know what happened, but why it happened, and look at the root cause. Buy me a beer and we can have a discussion about why root cause is not my favorite term, but the idea of understanding, pinpointing what the issue is. So monitoring just tells you when something happens. Observability lets you ask why, and most importantly, why would you use that information? You want to be able to pinpoint issues, you want to resolve them as quickly as possible, and also you want to tie the data to business outcomes. So we feel like it's important to reach observability, and we can help you in our product doing that. Observability is actually a superset of monitoring. And with all these complex systems, there's the term where we talk about the unknown unknowns. And there are a lot of good people working in systems right now, and they've kind of eliminated the kind of easy, obvious problems. So now what people and teams are dealing with is the more complicated problems, where it takes 2 or 3 events to bump against each other to cause a problem. So it gets a little bit harder, but we're going to give you some tools to help you out with that. I have issues with this being a straight line, the observability maturity path. You can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes right now. I work with a lot of customers, and I kind of see them in these various phases of starting out as reactive, and that's not bad. I mean, at least you're starting to instrument work with things, becoming more proactive, and then eventually becoming a data-driven company, where you're taking the data and the information that you get about customer usage, what releases work better, what features are actually being used, and use that to further your business. So we think you can take advantage of that data in a lot of different ways. Specifically, in terms of reactive, we talk about getting visibility into your systems, establishing baselines, setting basic alerts, and kind of fixing the obvious problems so you can get rid of your outliers and understand, quote unquote, what's normal. Proactive, we want you to be able to fix the issues before customers notice. You don't want to find out on Twitter that your site's down or people are having a bad experience. And you also want to optimize the processes. I'm talking about a tool, but DevOps, as you know, is culture. That's really important. You want to be able to optimize your processes so teams can balance resiliency with speed. I know there's a lot of pressure to deliver things more quickly, but if you're not able to roll back things really quickly, you know, there are going to be some problems. So you want to be able to balance those two competing issues. And then finally, as I said, being data-driven, you want to be able to constantly improve the customer experience and making sure your systems are resilient. So what does that actually look like inside New Relic? So if you start out reactive, and that word has a bad connotation, but it's a good place to start. Like, let's instrument your things, install some agents, and see how your applications are doing. Look at your back end. Also look at what is the user experience. We have something called AppDex, which is a system a comparison of numbers that give you a sense of how users are experiencing your system, whether they're happy, tolerating, or unhappy with it. And it's a great place to start to get a sense of how your users are doing. And then look at your error rate. You know, you've got to get rid of some of those errors because you want to smooth things out, get out the big outliers, and then you have a good sense of what normal is for the operations of your systems. And then also you want to start setting alerts. We love dashboards. I'm a big fan of them. There's a lot of things that they can do, but obviously you don't have people that can sit around and watch dashboards all day. So it's important to set alerts, and it should be pretty darn easy to set them. And don't forget tuning them. We can talk about that if you want to. This center picture, if you see the gray area right there, that's automatic baselining. So New Relic can look at your systems and get a sense of what the band of normal is. And then it's very easy to go define thresholds. How long do you want something to be flapping before you actually page somebody about it? So it's important to set a baseline of alerts for that. And then moving into the next phase, we talk about being more proactive and how important it is to establish SLOs. This is something where we had some users that wanted to scratch their own itch, so they went into the New Relic platform and built their own application, which is pretty straightforward and easy to do. And they're looking at the 4 golden signals here, and they want to understand how are they doing with their targets, 7-day, 30 days, what's the target, and then very easily if they need to go in and drill down and see what's going on. I find when I work with customers, one of the biggest parts of setting SLOs is getting all the right people in the room to agree about what is the most important thing. And, you know, getting a product manager, getting the right people, that's kind of the hard work. The tool, once you all agree on it, is pretty straightforward and easy to do. But it's really important to do that front-loaded sort of work. Also in the proactive stage, we talk about releasing more often. Kelly gave you some stats about how many releases they did. New Relic also, we release between 20 and 70 times a day. So it's really important to understand the impact of every release. This is actually a dashboard from one of our users. They have a mobile app that they monitor, and they want to know what's the crash rate. That's really important. And again, what's the user experience? So looking at the app text, how many users are annoyed. And this lower left is a really popular chart because often developers hit release and there's no tangible evidence of their application, their new version being adopted. So it's really nice to see the blue line go down and the yellow line go up. So it's important to be able to track these things and have an impact. And as I said, have a way to roll back if you need to do that as well. So in the next phase, we talk about being data-driven. You've seen the t-shirts. You probably own one that says DevOps never stops. That's true. I've had people, how do you get there? Well, there is no there there. The there is constantly trying to improve, continuously improve. Kelly alluded to that as well, having your architects look at your running software, figuring out ways to tune it and make it better. Some of the things that our customers often like to track are things of what's the fail rate of your deploys. Your particular SLAs, SLOs? Are you meeting them? How do they look? What's your mean time to resolution? How long does that take? And I'd like to say it's not just the number itself, but the trend's really important to know. Is that trending upward or downward? So that's really important information that you can share throughout your organization. So there's a lot of details. We've spent a lot of time talking about it, thinking internally at New Relic. We have the advantage of having some really smart SREs that we can go talk to and see how it works in the real world before we come talk to customers. And these are some of the typical KPIs that we give. I'm not expecting you to take this slide and run with it. That's what the people at Mission can really help you do. But we do feel like there's a path, that there's a general area where people can work, get together, and go from reactive to proactive to becoming more data-driven. So I just want to give a quick demo. I'm going to give you a look at our at New Relic. I'm going to share my screen. So this is a look at New Relic 1, which is our platform. And you can see here there's a group of applications. This is a demo account, so it's not as large as a lot of the customers we deal with. But these are various things that you can use. You can build dashboards. We have a cloud optimizer. And I just wanted to show you something called workloads, because I think this is a great way when you start thinking about the complexity of systems. It's really important to start thinking about things in a different way. So what workloads does is takes all the things that it takes to build a service. And when I say service, I'm not meaning microservice. I'm thinking in terms of more from a more discrete chunk that tells you the various things that that it takes to build a thing. So, for example, the different types of entities that it takes for, this is the customer experience team for Acme Telco. They sell phones over the internet for people to look at. And what is the user experience, and what are the things it takes to build that out? So the things here, we've got services, hosts, we've got a browser application, we've got some block store, we got some load balancers, and a synthetic monitor to ping the things to make sure it's working. So this brings all the things together in one screen, and it's great. So instead of just looking at hosts out by themselves, we want to look at the whole thing. And what we do is we are opinionated because we're New Relic and we like to be that way. I'm making my screen a little bit bigger. I hope that helps. And we are looking at the signals that are the most important for these kind of things. So for the services, we're displaying throughput, error rate, response time. And for host, we're doing things like CPU usage, memory usage. And for the browser application, we're looking at throughput and how quickly the actual page paints, and what's the delay time, and what are the errors. So this is a great way to look at a service. If I'm responsible for that quote unquote thing, I can look at all of the things and see how they're doing together. And I can also look across various times. It's really easy to share the time period and get a look across and see how things are doing. So for example, if I were on the Acme Telco backend chain and I'm responsible for the backend, the fulfillment, what does it take to actually get an order out to a customer? Here are the things I'm looking at. I'm looking at some services, the host, the load balancers, and I can see there are issues with the hosts right here. So it gives me a way just to click in and get some more specific information about what's important. And I can drill down and take a look on the host and see what's going on. And we can see that there's a big spike going on in CPU usage. So within a few clicks, you're taking a look at the information that that's being given out by your various services and the infrastructure you're dependent upon. and maybe it's not your responsibility, but within a few clicks, you can see which team you can hand it off to. So that's just a different way of starting to look at things rather than I'm just going to monitor the host. I'm just going to be in my silo and look at seeing how the network is doing. This is how things are built, and this is how a user experiences it. So it's really important to start monitoring and interacting with it that way. So that's what was going on. And let's see, I'll go back to the slides. Gentlemen, hey there. Yeah, so that's workloads. It gives you a sense of the very metric, open violations, things that link dashboards, information you think is important to drill down to. So that's just an overview of New Relic, how we see observability, how we can help you out in the program, and how we're starting to think about dealing with more complex times. So thank you, gentlemen, both very much. And Lance, tell me about mission and how we can help customers.
All righty. Thank you so much, Tori. Thank you so much, Kelly. So before I kind of start, I wanted to call out that we have provided some data sheets that go over our offerings, especially around our managed DevOps service. So if you are on the webinar, they should be available as links on the right side of the page. But in general, the service is essentially working with our customers to understand their business goals and objectives, as well as the applications that they're running to serve those business needs, along with kind of the infrastructure and kind of some of the process of the environment, just so we can have a good understanding of how things work and how we could be of value as a consulting and kind of DevOps service provider. In general, running workloads just over the course of time, things tend to become more complex as new features are released into the application or the product, new infrastructures provisioned to support those feature sets. And as teams grow, the processes will continue to evolve over time. So DevOps is really about understanding all that complexity and pairing you with some senior engineers and consultants on our side who can really do that deep technical discovery and understand the application, how it's packaged, how it's built, how it's deployed, how to run it, how to serve it at large scale in production. And then we use tools like New Relic to instrument and monitor the environment and help with all of the observability and capturing not only the metrics, but the right metrics, because it's a very important aspect. Even a simple architecture could have hundreds of different data points to monitor and alert on, but not everyone is necessarily relevant. It's really about determining the right things to monitor and alert on. So along with the general architecture and the road mapping, we perform hands-on keyboard work. So our engineers are typically involved with activities that are scripting, creating those automation components that help businesses achieve their goals, setting up the CI/CD pipelines and deployment processes, as well as doing all of the infrastructure as code activities like templating the infrastructure. There are a lot of platform settings and configurations for both New Relic and AWS. If you have any additional questions about mission, our managed DevOps service, or about the New Relic product, or even from the AWS platform, please feel free to throw your questions into the little question section on the webinar. And at this point, we're going to kick it over to Q&A. So let's browse what we've got in so far. So I'll start with one. We get too many alerts from our tools. How do we reduce that?
Wow, I'll take that. Yeah, unfortunately, it might be a little too easy to set alerts in a lot of our tools. For example, you can create alert conditions as resources directly in CloudFormation templates, so it hooks very nicely with AWS. But yeah, as our friends at PagerDuty say, alert liberally, but page infrequently. And I think you really do have to sit down and spend some time deciding what's the level of, if you can figure out severity levels and do some nice rules around, uh, um, the amount of alerts and how important various things are. And For example, New Relic supports muting rules, so you can silence notifications during maintenance windows because you're expecting to have a lot of alerts. And our engineering teams sometimes, as they get so many alerts, I've actually worked with teams that just zero out their alerts because historically somebody's moved on from the project and they're not even really sure why a certain thing was alerted. So I guess overall, just don't set it and forget it, but work on tuning that as you do everything else you work on.
Yeah, to add to that, Tori, alert fatigue is absolutely a thing, and as complexity grows and the number of alerts go up, that really adds a lot of interrupts, and it is a coined as alert fatigue. Too many alerts is definitely a bad thing, so it is something that also has to be iteratively improved upon.
Yeah, I'll just add the comment in that I see customers all the time that buy their shiny new monitoring products, and that's supposed to help them solve their complexity problem, and all it does is add to the problem by immediately having them be completely overwhelmed with a bunch of new data that they don't know what to do with. So what these products what these products give you is a lot of work that you need to do unless you know how to use the products really well. And so well, the good news is that the products give you a lot of great ways to reduce this complexity, but you've got to know how to use the products. You want to get the proper help from the proper, either the proper training with the product, or get the right kind of help via consulting of how to use the products well in order to kind of get things narrowed down as you need to.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Tori. So we have another question in. Is it better to have a centralized SRE team or SREs embedded in the product teams? Great question.
Yeah, I'd love to take a shot at that, and I'm sure Tori will add to it as well. I alluded to this a little bit in what I mentioned about, it's from a standpoint of AWS, we don't normally have an SRE role per se, but we do all the kind of SRE types of activities. The SRE role came out of an organizational structure that was set up at Google, and it's a great book. It's documented there. This is something that I'm fairly sure that Eric Schmidt helped to set up there at Google. And so here's something that was set up by a great software engineer. And I think that from our standpoint at Amazon, when we kind of look at that, we're very deeply DevOps oriented. We think in terms of highly independent end-to-end organizations building software from A all the way to Z. And for us, an SRE organization feels like another silo. For a much more centralized organization, as Google was kind of set up to be, that silo may have made sense, and they put very, very, very senior software engineers there that you could toss your applications over to, and could run it and could take over and kind of do that. So it kind of maybe it made sense for them. But I think for a lot of organizations, it may or may not. And so I think the answer to the question is it depends. It depends on whether you want to be more centralized or you want to be maybe a little bit more nimble and a little bit more entrepreneurial. Both can work, I think. The key thing for me is, I think, are you doing all the kind of SRE activities that I think are continuing to grow? Are you doing the latest in operations types of activities as far as how to do software operations really in a state-of-the-art sort of a way. Tori, what do you think?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the right answer is yes. It's I can speak to what we do at New Relic, and that is our product teams are responsible for putting their software out into production, and we do have people on the teams. They're all labeled engineers, but we talk about T-shaped people that are, broad on the top but go deep. And we do have people on the team that are deeply steeped in understanding reliability and running systems. The difference is they're not alone responsible for it on the team. The entire team's responsible for it. So that's having people, quote unquote, SREs embedded. But we've also had a need of a more centralized team, and there are roles called site reliability champions. And those are the people that deal with things that go across teams, and they also look further down the road. So what do you need to, what conversations do you need to have with the software architect as they're starting to, as you said, architect the next great thing, whether they do that or not. But in terms of what are the reliability concerns that should be upfront when architects are starting to think about what they're working on next.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Tori. At this time, those were our only questions. I'm going to be moving on to the final slide, the call to action. And first of all, just wanted to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. We really appreciate your time. And for those who are in attendance, please visit the website, missioncloud.com/DevOps. You will be able to receive or sign up for a 1-hour joint migration consulting and DevOps consulting with AWS and Mission. So let's definitely continue the conversation. And if any of these things that we discussed today have resonated with you or could potentially impact your business in a positive way, please reach out and let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much for attending the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Let's wave.
Bye.